Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors.
And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent show for you today. First, I will be giving a news report on major events for the week. That will be followed by a report from German aid to Ukraine about German aid to Ukraine. That will be followed by a discussion of the recent vote in the Bundestag about the Taurus and sort of the implications of that vote. And finally, we'll have a military panel where John Ridge will lead a discussion about Russian missiles and French glide bombs, some developments from this week. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I will now get straight to the news. Okay, on the evening of January 15th, 2024, a significant military incident took place over the Sea of Azov. A Russian A-50, long-range radar detection and control plane, along with an Ilyushin-22 or an IL-22 command plane, were engaged in the incident. The Ukrainian Air Force launched an operation against these aircraft, successfully shooting down the A-50 and inflicting damage on the Ilyushin-22. The downed A-50 was confirmed, while the damaged Ilyushin-22 reportedly managed to land safely in Russia. We actually did see a photo of that Ilyushin-22 with a damaged tail, so I think it's probably the case that it made it back. Ukrainian military officials responded to the event with commendation and cryptic remarks. Valery Zaluzhny, the Ukrainian Army Commander-in-Chief, lauded the Air Force for their flawlessly planned and executed operation. Additionally, Mykola Oleschuk, the Ukrainian Air Force commander, issued a statement that seemed to suggest retaliation for previous actions by Russia. I would add that there's maybe some chatter on the Russian side that this was some kind of a self-shoot-down. As was mentioned, the statements from the Ukrainian side were a bit cryptic, so it's a little bit unclear exactly what happened, but as far as I was able to clarify, it's definitely within the capability of Patriot system to do this. It seems a little bit strange that the Russians would kind of out of nowhere shoot two of their command planes like that, but it's possible. So both explanations are possible, but I would lean towards Ukraine successfully shooting down this A-50. This aircraft involved in the incident, the A-50, is of significant importance to the Russian military. The A-50 is a high-value asset equipped with advanced radar capable of detecting targets up to 400 kilometers away. It plays a crucial role in aerial surveillance and coordination. I would add it's basically irreplaceable for Russia in the near term. The Ilyushin-22 serves as an airborne command post, essential for coordinating military operations and maintaining communications with frontline troops. The Russian response to this incident has been notably muted. The Kremlin has yet to officially confirm the loss. Reactions among Russian military bloggers have been mixed, with some expressing grief over the loss, while others acknowledged a significant blow to their Air Force. Oh, so good, you guys. From a strategic standpoint, the downing of the A-50 and the damage to the Ilyushin-22 signify a major setback for Russian aerial operations and surveillance capabilities in the Black Sea. This incident also illustrates the effectiveness of Ukrainian air defense, particularly in the southern part of the country, where Ukrainian forces have previously succeeded in downing several Russian aircraft over the past month or so. Overall, this event represents a notable triumph for Ukrainian forces and a significant loss for the Russian military, given the strategic value of the aircraft involved. Up next, for the 16th of January, ahead of the World Economic Forum, Ukrainian officials met with representatives from various partner countries to promote Ukraine's 10-point vision for peace. This vision has been part of Ukraine's diplomatic efforts for many months, though it has been dismissed by Moscow, mainly because Ukraine, of course, is demanding the restoration of its 1991 internationally recognized borders. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attended the conference to emphasize the importance of Ukraine's struggle and to argue for continued international support. His presence was aimed at keeping Ukraine at the forefront of the global agenda, advocating for more military aid and emphasizing Ukraine as an investment destination during the rebuilding process. In his speech, President Zelensky also emphasized the need for air superiority in Ukraine and called for tightening sanctions on Moscow. He suggested that frozen Russian assets should be used for defending against the Russians and for the reconstruction of Ukraine in the future. The conference was an opportunity for Ukraine to seek continued support from its allies. Discussions included the need for new weapons and ammunition, as well as a bilateral meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, which Blinken reassured enduring U.S. support. A significant topic of discussion also was the European Union's aid package for Ukraine. A proposed 54 billion aid package is being blocked by Hungary, with discussions underway on how to proceed, either with or without Hungary's involvement. The stalemate in the conflict brought about discussions for the possibility of negotiating an end to the war. The Swiss foreign minister noted that peace would require meaningful talks with Russia, but also stressed that Ukraine's partners should not be passive and wait for Moscow to be ready. So I don't know, the Swiss, being the Swiss, I guess. The conference served as a platform for various international leaders and representatives to discuss the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. I would maybe just add, if you couldn't tell here, a lot of noise, like not a lot of substance that I could tell from this conference. I think that reading between the lines, what's probably going on here is Davos, the World Economic Forum, is a very important event where a lot of very wealthy and powerful people get together to meet. And if I had to sort of guess, I think the specifics about how to use Russian assets for purpose of helping Ukraine was on the agenda. Working those details out is going to require a lot of kind of discussion by these parties. So I think that while on the face of it, there's not a lot really of substance going on here. It's just a lot of hot air mostly. I think that probably in the back rooms, there's pretty significant like deals being worked out and things being accomplished. That would be my guess, but of course I'm certainly not privy to the back rooms of Davos. Okay, next item. The supply of Scalp EG cruise missiles and bombs from France. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, announced that France would supply Ukraine with about 40 more Scalp EG cruise missiles and hundreds of glide bombs, which John will be talking about later, in the coming weeks. This is in addition already to the 155mm Caesar howitzers that France agreed to supply recently. France is finalizing a bilateral security agreement with Ukraine. This is in addition to all this other stuff. This is just kind of a general update on France stuff. France is finalizing a bilateral security agreement with Ukraine, similar to the one concluded by the UK that I reported on last week. This agreement will further support Ukraine with training, maintaining front lines, and defending the skies. Macron also mentioned ongoing efforts to help Ukraine with the deliveries of needed weapons. Macron promised to support the agreement and expressed that the discussion of the proposal is planned for February of this year. Next item. On January 19th, 2024, the Kremlin announced that there is no prospect of reviving the Black Sea grain deal, which was a crucial agreement that helped Ukraine export millions of metric tons of grains and oil seeds, despite the ongoing war with Russia, or Russian invasion, I should say. The Black Sea grain deal was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, and it was pivotal in allowing the exports to go through safely. The Kremlin expressed no interest in renewing the deal. However, we do have some positive news, which is that according to, I believe, Ukraine's agricultural minister, Kozachenko, Ukraine's grain exports have nearly returned to pre-war levels, which is very impressive. Before the war, or before the full-scale invasion, I should say, the average monthly report was around 7.5 to 8 million tons of grain and oilseed. Despite the current war conditions, Ukraine has managed to cross the threshold, which indicates a very significant recovery in export capacity. The Black Sea terminals were the main export routes for Ukraine before the war. The Mykolaiv and Kherson terminals are not currently operational, and their restoration is pending. However, the progress made in utilizing other routes and methods has been crucial. To protect the maritime export corridor, Ukraine has installed new weapons along Black Sea shores to counter hostile threats to grain transport. These measures have successfully decreased the cost of ensuring shipments from 7% to 1.25% of the cargo value, thanks to the demonstrated ability to protect the shipping. The UK has also provided a pivotal role. British insurance companies have been the first to insure grain shipments, and the UK has declared its readiness to use military aircraft to export ships owned by British companies, contributing to the further security of grain exports. The fourfold increase in logistics costs due to the war has forced Ukrainian farmers to reduce the sowing of winter grain crops. Small and medium-sized farmers in particular have started exporting grain independently. Over the last 2 years, the number of such legal entities has grown by 1,500. These entities primarily export to the EU, while larger companies focus on markets in the Middle East, China, and India. The Ministry of Infrastructure set 2 conditions for the rebuilding of the port at Kherson: the liberation of Kherson's left bank and the cessation of shelling in Kherson. The Dnieper River remains a key navigable artery, with cargo traditionally transiting through the Kherson port towards the deepwater locations and loading on to Panamax, like large shipping container vessels, at Ochakov or in Odessa. The this is the president of the Agricultural Association in Ukraine, not the Minister of Agriculture, my mistake, highlighted the challenges posed by the EU's apprehension towards open trade corridors, which directly impact small and medium-sized Ukrainian farmers. The situation is also compounded by policies and subsidies that support smaller-sized farms in the EU. This is like a big thing in the EU. There's lots of little, bespoke kind of agricultural products that have certain protections in the EU. There's been a lot of friction over integrating Ukraine's agricultural exports into the EU market with a lot of those interest groups. We've seen kind of these strikes and things happen as a result of that. And the other thing I would maybe add, which was maybe mentioned here, but I'll elaborate a bit, is that a lot of these costs, or I would say most, if not all of these costs, get pushed onto the farmers themselves. In other words, they're the ones who have to eat these extra costs during wartime. The shippers aren't going to ship at a loss, and so forth. So the only people that really can afford the people selling the grain have to lower the price, right? So that it really hurts the farmers most of all, the war. So it's a real issue for Ukraine. It's a big part of their economy, and it's really impressive that they've been able so far to, without the help of the UN and Turkey with the Black Sea Grain Initiative, maintain these exports levels. So very, very impressive efforts from Ukraine, and we hope that Ukrainian farmers get a break soon and manage to not have to export things at such difficult conditions. Okay, final item. The Russian government has utilized nearly half of their sovereign wealth fund's available reserves to support their economy during the war in Ukraine. The liquid assets of the National Wellbeing Fund, which is the name of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, have significantly decreased from 8.9 trillion rubles before the war to 5 trillion rubles at the end of the previous year. This reduction in assets makes the fund more susceptible to future economic shocks. The depletion is primarily due to the government's increased spending on the military and other measures to bolster the economy. In response to Western sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the government has utilized the fund to cover all their budget deficits. There are plans to further withdraw 1.3 trillion rubles this year, already marked in the budget. Additionally, the fund is obligated to compensate for any shortfall in export revenue from oil sales if prices fall below the budget estimate. The average price of Urals crude, Russia's primary export blend, declined over 17% last year. The continued depletion of the fund is expected unless oil prices exceed a certain threshold. And I would just add here that as far as I've read, I mean, I'm certainly not an oil futures expert, but the general vibe is that the prediction is that demand will be relatively low next year because of China and COVID and things like that, things I don't really need to go into. And the point is, oil prices aren't expected to be particularly high next year. Yeah, pretty devastating news for Russia's economy. The sovereign wealth fund was something that Putin built up over a very long period. It was designed specifically for this reason, to insulate them from shocks like this. And they haven't been able to extricate themselves from this war that they started, and the fund is draining rapidly. So here's hoping that it runs out and they're forced to make further cuts that might result finally in a change in their behavior. So that concludes my news report for this week. I believe up next will be German aid to Ukraine with his report on the current aid heading over there from Germany. Over to you, German aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. Just for your information, this new segment will be shorter, like he already mentioned, because we will talk about the whole Taurus debate at the end of my segment. So we are able to have a longer discussion about it. Yeah. Starting with Monday, the EU has updated its statistics on the temporary protection of Ukrainian refugees in the EU between the 31st of October and the 30th of November 2023. 20,595 Ukrainian refugees were admitted to Germany. This means that Germany is currently home to over 1.2 million Ukrainian refugees, which is almost 29% in EU total. Yuri Ignat, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force, told Deutsche Welle this week that they expect from Germany the delivery of another IRIS-T SLM air defense system by the end of the current winter. Another 4 systems are expected until the end of 2024, which means that Ukraine expects a total of 5 IRIS-T SLM air defense systems from Germany this year, which is a lot, to be honest. On Tuesday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke with the US President Joe Biden about the future support of Ukraine. 3 days later, the Federal Press Office announced that Scholz will welcome the French President Emmanuel Macron to Berlin to also talk about Ukraine, among other topics. And on the same day, they announced that Scholz also spoke to the British Prime Minister Sunak on the phone, also about future Ukraine aid. For me, it really feels as if Scholz is actually checking up on Ukraine's most important allies and feeling them out in terms of aid to Ukraine. I mean, this all comes now about 1 or 2 weeks after the German Chancellor called on the supporters of Ukraine inside of NATO and the EU to provide more military aid, which most of you probably already read in the news somewhere. So yeah, really great stuff from the Chancellor. On Wednesday, the German government updated the list of military assistance to Ukraine after about 2 weeks and made public that they have delivered the following to Ukraine: 25 RQ-35 Hydron UAVs, 8 FFG APCs, which you also see in the picture, 60 Mercedes-Benz Zetros tank trucks for water or fuel, 5 border protection vehicles, 3 regular vehicles, ammunition for the Leopard 1A5 MBTs, material for explosive ordnance disposal, 50 satellite communication terminals, which are most likely SATCOM terminals, 1,840 combat helmets, and 500 Falke light systems. The German government also announced new pledges to Ukraine, which include a further 124 RQ-35 Hydron UAVs, 15 Gepard Sparks, which are most likely the German share of the Jordanian Cheetah Sparks, which the German government announced in June last year. Another 20 Marder 1A3 IFVs, which should be now the last available ones at Rheinmetall. So every other pledge should be, in theory, now come from the Bundeswehr directly when they are replacing their systems with the Puma. 40 Mercedes-Benz Zetros tank trucks for water and fuel, 20 Mercedes-Benz Zetros refrigerator trucks, very interested to know where they're getting used, and 2,500 another combat helmets. And as the last item of my segment, on the same day, we got great news from Quantum Systems. The manufacturer of the Vector UAVs, which are being supplied to Ukraine on the behalf of the German government, is currently testing an improvement to the drones that will allow the Vector to detect artillery through acoustic sensing. This means that the area that Ukrainian operators can cover becomes incredibly large compared to just basic visual detection or observation. So great news, great improvement. And yeah, that's my segment for now. So do you want to now talk about Taurus, Erlend?
Yeah, thank you very much, Germinate to Ukraine. So, yeah, well, my question basically, I'm going to change the screen here now. But yeah, I have some questions because there was a lot of attention about the Taurus missile recently because of this vote in the German Bundestag, which is the German parliament. And what actually happened and why was this vote brought up in the first place? That's my first question.
Yeah. So just like you mentioned, on Wednesday, the Bundestag voted on a motion from the CDU, this is the biggest opposition party in Germany, of a Taurus delivery to Ukraine. The motion basically was rejected. I can, if you're interested in it, I can give you like all the details on how many people voted in favor of it, etc. And the CDU basically like wanted to find a decision, said we need Taurus for Ukraine. Of course, they are absolutely right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But the way how they did it with the motion is, in my personal opinion, not a good way to approach the situation. Because in terms of the SPD, the Greens, die Grüne, Bündnis 90, and the FDP, so the ruling parties in Germany, for their perspective or from their perspective, it just really looked like a political move, and I don't think they are that wrong with it. I mean, of
Okay.
course, yeah.
Let's go back like a little bit. So, first of all, who are the ruling parties and who is opposition here in this constellation?
Yeah, so the biggest ruling party in Germany is the SPD, that's Scholz party, basically. Then we have the Greens, where Habeck and our foreign minister Baerbock, for example, are part of. And then we have the FDP, where, for example, our Minister of Finance, Christian Lindner, is part of. That's the ruling parties in Germany.
And the opposition is CDU, AfD, and Fraktionslos, which means like not belonging to any party, I guess.
Yeah, so the opposition party, of course, the CDU-CSU, basically Merkel's old party, now led by Friedrich Merz. Then we have, of course, the AfD, like the far rights, who are also, don't try to insult someone, who are favoring the politics Putin is doing. And then, of course, we have the left ones, prior the Die Linke. They have now a new party from the leader Wagenknecht. Bündnis Wagenknecht is the name. So they all left the old party and now have like basically no saying in the Bundestag anymore, at least not to that extent to what the other parties have, because they're not part of a party anymore.
But what really confuses me is that we haven't seen any like weapons deliveries, and the details about them has never been in the Bundestag, really, has it? Why is it
what
in the
do you
Bundestag?
mean exactly?
Like when Germany is delivering new Iris-T system or more artillery munitions, etc., does the Bundestag vote for every single donation?
No. They don't vote for that kind of stuff. That's nothing what the Bundestag is directly concerned. with. Of course, they're debating about certain things. They use the deliveries for their arguments or this kind of stuff, but they don't have a saying directly in the voting, in the deliveries itself,
But
not directly.
but this time they did it, and I guess this looks like to me that this is something that the CDU is started, and
I
also
mean,
from what I've been reading, that the CDU basically initiated this vote.
yeah, so the CDU initiated this vote, this motion. This is absolutely correct. But we always have to bear in mind, and I think that a lot of people forget this, is that the whole voting didn't like achieve anything. It had no binding power, no rights, nothing. Like the only person in Germany who actually can decide on a final basis is Scholz, and of course the Federal Security Council. But I don't think that the Federal Security Council would say no if Scholz says yes. To be honest, so it's basically only down to Scholz, and so the vote has no binding power. It's very interesting, of course, to see how the Bundestag would vote for it, but yeah, it's no power actually, no decision making.
Yeah. So basically, a political move rather than an actual substantial, meaningful vote.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's try to see it from a perspective from the governing parties, from the ruling parties. If they vote in favor of the motion and it actually turns out to be positive, they have a lot of media attention on the same day in Germany and also outside of Germany. Like I basically see the headlines in front of me, like government divided, pressure on the chancellor increased, government majority for delivery. What is Scholz going to do now? This kind of stuff, right? But the fact that the governing parties actually voted against it at least shows that they are united. So, nevertheless, they still get all the hate in Germany and outside of Germany. I mean, we all saw what happened on social media and stuff. It was absolutely insane. And this is basically a win-win situation for the opposition. No matter how the vote turned out, either the German government is divided and the pressure on the chancellor increased, or they're getting all the hate because they vote against the delivery. It's
Yeah.
win-win.
I understand, and I think this website is kind of interesting. It's very transparent because you can click the parties and then you can see actually who voted what here.
Yes.
That's very interesting. It's a very German thing. And you also wrote an article on your blog about production, integration, and refurbishment of the Taurus because in the recent weeks as well, there's been also quite a lot of discussion about the availability of Taurus, and that was again brought up in connection with this vote in Bundestag. So yeah, you basically wrote an article about this here, and
Yeah.
because there was a minister that said like, or was it a minister or was it just a politician that said like we don't have enough and we cannot refurbish them or something like
Yeah.
this?
So Johannes Arndt, he is an SPD politician and he's part in the defense committee in the Bundestag, so a very important office. He basically said that although he sees very positive things Ukraine can do with the Taurus, so it's not only about bad stuff. He also said that Ukraine knows how to use the systems very good, so everything fine. But he basically said that he is against the delivery because the industry, so MBDA or Taurus systems, isn't able to reproduce the Taurus at the short term. And I mean, this is like a contradictory statement to a tweet they made already in November that they can like start the production at short notice. And I wrote to MBDA that day, like a couple hours later, and about half an hour after my press inquiry, they put out a tweet on on Twitter and stating like integration, production, and the refurbishment of the weapon systems already in stock in the Bundeswehr can start at short notice. And it basically needs about like 1 year until they start the reproduction, and another like 1.5 to 2.5 years. At least that's what I heard from other articles and experts I talked to. And when we consider that time frame, like let's say 3.5 years, Pistorius said just a couple of days ago, so Germany's Minister of Defense said just a couple of days ago that we have about 5 to 8 years time until Russia is ready or would attack NATO territory. So the 3.5 years until the Taurus refurbishment or new production, until Germany gets the systems back which we would have sent to Ukraine, is actually enough. There's like still 1.5 years after that time.
So I guess I want to try and bring John into this discussion, because this is about missile production. And John, what do you think this has to tell us about European missile production capabilities? John, are you?
We lost John.
Yeah, sorry. I've unmuted you now, John.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Apologies. Well, anyway, so regarding European missile production, broadly speaking, the situation is catastrophically dire, to put it optimistically. This has been an area of the European collective defense industrial base that has seen really massive underinvestment for many decades now, since the conclusion of the Cold War. And capacity in terms of what currently is available just doesn't really exist in a meaningful way. The UK or MBDA UK, their Storm Shadow line is inactive. My understanding of it, on good authority, based upon some conversations I've had with those that are familiar with MBDA UK and the Storm Shadow program, they don't have the ability to, for a variety of reasons, to quickly restart production, and it would require a very large investment from the UK MOD, which they just currently simply don't have the funds for, with what they've been provided by His Majesty's Treasury. The volume that MBDA France can produce in terms of Scalp EG is very small. Currently, they are essentially fully dedicated to refurbing and doing a life extension for Greece's inventory of Scalp EGs, and they likely have some additional new build production capacity on top of that, but it's relatively minuscule. Obviously, Taurus production ended in, I believe, 2019. The only major producer of European long-range strike capability now is Kongsberg in Norway. They're rapidly scaling NSM, naval strike missile production, primarily to fulfill a rather large order for the United States Navy, as we have decided to make that our standard going forward anti-ship missile for our surface combatants. We've ordered in excess of 5,000, I believe, so they are rapidly scaling capacity at multiple facilities in Norway. There's going to be a facility in the United States and another facility in Australia, as the Australian Navy has also placed similar orders to meet that existing demand. But outside of that, the European industrial situation is very dire. Neither the United Kingdom or France ever bothered to replenish their Storm Shadow, Scalp EG inventories following expenditures since 2011, since Libya, in Syria, and France and various other operations throughout the region. So I believe the UK initially purchased 1,000 Storm Shadows, expended a couple hundred of them in operations prior to 2022. France had purchased 500 Scalp EGs and expended 100 something or another, again, prior to the invasion in 2022. Thus far, the UK has made what's likely a couple hundred Storm Shadows available to Ukraine. We haven't received a specific number either from the MOD or UK media. France, on the other hand, we can pretty roughly estimate 90 have been delivered or pledged thus far based upon reports from French media as well as just explicit statements from the French government. So France's ability to continue to provide Storm Shadows, Scout BG, is rapidly coming to a close. With that 90 committed, they only have, I believe, 45 more left that they can send, and after that, they just have their 250 life extended missiles that they are going to keep for their own use. And then the UK is also maybe not in quite as dire a situation, but it's trending negative as, again, they have no way to replenish their stocks for the next 4 years until they begin producing FCASW, which is Future Cruise Anti-Ship Weapon, that will replace Storm Shadow in both UK and French service.
So, as far as I understand, this does not have anything to do with the, let's say, industrial or intellectual capability that Europe has.
It's purely
political.
It's purely a matter of defense spending and industrial policy on the part of the relevant governments. It's just not a sector they've made investments in, and as a result, everybody is very short of consumables in Europe. Nobody really has any particularly large magazine depth. I mean, the underlying issue, well, there's many, but I think the more pressing issue isn't the fact that, say, these inventory requirements are small. It's that they were never replenished. The RAF maintaining an inventory requirement and a stock of 1,000 Storm Shadows, while that's low, actually maintaining that 1,000 level would be quite respectable. The problem is they didn't, and France is in an even more dire situation given the fact they only procured 500 to begin with, and like the UK, they did not replenish their expended stock prior to 2022. So that in particular really contributes to, there's just no orders. There's no capacity available because there's no orders, and there's no orders because there's just not funding available to procure these systems prior to 2022 anyways.
So going back to you, Germany, to Ukraine. So what do you see like the prospects of political will to restart the production again? Let's say when, I'm not going to say if, but when Ukraine finally gets the Taurus transferred, because I'm a strong believer that Germany will at some point transfer them. You think they're going to restart the production, or are they just going to refurbish some of the older missiles and try and wait for a new missile to appear from somewhere?
So in my opinion, they won't wait for a new missile, because I don't think there will be a new missile. In terms of refurbishment, what we know is that about like 150 are ready for combat, and the other about 450 need to be refurbished. So I hope that they maybe even prior to the announcement that they are delivering the Taurus, because I think they will be an announcement. I hope they do the refurbishment or contract the refurbishment prior to that. And of course, they need to reproduce them, because the Taurus, that we need the Taurus for NATO obligations, is like one of the strongest arguments made from the governing parties why we are not delivering the Taurus. So it would absolutely make no sense to give away, like, let's say 100 Taurus to Ukraine and not replace them with another 100. It would make no sense at all. So we will absolutely see a new production, at least in my opinion, and I hope they do it ASAP, not wait, because it wouldn't be the first time Germany waits, like, let's say 1 year or 2 years until they reproduce weapon systems or other material we have given to Ukraine, and we don't have the time for that. And but we always have to keep in mind that this costs a lot of money. We are certainly talking about like hundreds of millions of euros, which would be, since these are replenishments of stocks we have given to Ukraine, we would spend that money from the Bundeswehr Special Fund, from the 100 billion euros fund. And this fund is already like not enough to replenish the Bundeswehr. And then there's another 500, let's say now 500 million. Then there's another 500 million euros missing, which could be invested to buy, I don't know, like half of all the IRIS-T SLM systems Germany wants to procure. So just to give you an idea how much money we would have to invest for new production. Yeah, this will also certainly play a role in the delivery to Ukraine, but they need to reproduce them.
Yeah, I saw that Stoltenberg, the NATO General Secretary, he was talking at the World Economic Forum, and he made some remarks about readiness in Europe and the really big needs to invest considerable amounts of money for munitions and stocks as well. And I think there is a NATO project going on as well now with a central, where some contracts were issued for a central munition storage in Europe. So I wonder if maybe something like that could also help in general the industry on also these sort of systems. I mean, it's not just Germany that needs cruise missiles, right?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in Europe, the only country which also has the Taurus is Spain, when I remember right. Please, John, correct me
Yes.
if you're
Yes,
okay.
they
Yeah,
operate Taurus. Yes.
yeah,
Well,
and
Spain, Greece, and Italy, and France, of course. Oh, excuse me, I'm out of my mind. I'm out of my mind. I thought I got mixed up with Scalpg. Yeah, it's just Spain and Germany. My bad.
yeah, no worries. I was a bit confused. I was like, wait, what? Yeah, and apart from that, I believe only South Korea, right, who has some, but I don't expect South Korea delivering cruise missiles to Ukraine. But in theory, it could also be possible that when Germany says, okay, let's go, that Spain says, okay, we are also delivering a couple of them, because we know like giving more to Ukraine is also good for Ukraine, and ordering more from the industry is also good for the industry and for us, because the more systems you procure, the less is the price. At least at some point. Maybe we see that, and yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe we should move forward to the next segment. John,
Sorry, can I say one more thing about the Taurus? Very
of
sorry.
course, you can talk about Taurus for as long as you want.
Oh no, I won't. So first, I would like to say that I'm by no means seeing that the whole Taurus topic is just a game for the CDU. So just for any German here who says this or thinks this, it's no, absolutely not. For many, it's certainly a genuine desire to help Ukraine more intensively, also with Taurus cruise missiles. But this is also the case with the Greens, the FDP, and even parts from the SPD, so from the ruling parties. Because, and that's what I wanted to mention, leading supporters of the ruling parties in Germany, which favor a Taurus delivery to Ukraine, because we have to keep in mind everyone, even the people who are publicly voting for Taurus since day one, since many, many months, even they voted against the motion. And they basically announced directly after the vote that they are already working on an own motion, which is to be submitted to the Bundestag in February, I believe. Yeah, it was February, exactly. And this proposal would also include the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles. And that would, of course, also support the theory that all the government parties, voted collectively against the CDU-CSU motion just because they assumed it was a political stunt, not because they do not support the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles. Just to want it absolutely clear at the end. Thanks.
Yeah, I think in general we need to create some more positivity around German aid to Ukraine, GAU. Not you as a person, GAU, but the aid that Germany is providing to Ukraine, because it's right now it's basically the backbone for Ukraine's future. Without the US getting getting the stuff in order over at the Congress. It seems like Germany is going to be the biggest provider of military aid to Ukraine, and I think the signaling delivery of Taurus now or soon would be very, very important for Europe.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, it would really set Germany as the leader of the, let's say, the coalition of the willing in Europe, which I think Germany now deserves. But you need that little extra push, in my opinion. And then I just wanted to tease you a little bit with the fact that what's the range again for the Taurus?
Official or unofficial?
Unofficial, the real range.
Unofficial up to 700 kilometers.
Yeah, I think in some released Bundestag materials, I want to say it was referenced as about 730-ish.
So if we go on the map, and what's the problem? So if you go on the map, this is, by the way, Andrew Perpetua's map. He has this really nice function. You can, let's say, 720 to be conservative, and if we put it like on the very edge here, that didn't work. Oh yeah, so there's a lot of targets that Ukraine could hit, and I guess this is the political elephant in the room for a lot of Germans. Even if Ukraine would promise that they wouldn't do that, do you think that is the main reason for the politicians being so reluctant to send it?
I think there could be two reasons, actually. The first one is Ukraine can send back to Germany. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think, of course, the one reason is like the trust. I mean, a lot of people always say and complain, yeah, but you can trust Ukraine, and they never did anything with the storm shadows and stuff like this. But what people always forget is, for example, the example with the Patriot system, when Germany basically said with all their weapon deliveries, do not use our weapon systems on Russian territory. And just want to make that clear before I explain the situation. I totally understand why they did it, and it's totally fine also from my perspective, and I support it. But they did go to the border in the Bryansk region, and they shoot down 5 airplanes, like 2 fighter jets and 3 helicopters inside of Russia with the German delivered Patriot system, even if we already said don't do it. And they did it anyway. So nobody, and I'm going to be unpopular here, it seems, but nobody can tell me then that we have to trust Ukraine. It makes totally sense that they did it, and I'm very glad that they did it. But it shows that they are most likely doing what we're telling them to do, and they need to do it because they need our assistance, not just from Germany, from other countries. But if they really, really see a target, and if they really feel like they have to do it, they don't listen to us, and they do what's best for them, which I, like I said, totally understand. So maybe the trust issue with Moscow and stuff like this, absolutely. And also, it's hard to explain for me in English, but there could also be something that some politicians are opposing the delivery, and then could be the situation that the Bundestag has to discuss the Taurus delivery publicly, and technical details which are not publicly known yet and shouldn't be known to, for example, the Russians, have to made public to everyone. So there's like no secret anymore about the weapon systems. This could also be a reason why Scholz doesn't want to do it, because yeah, he basically would give the Russians everything they need to fully understand the Taurus. And the third reason would be an article which nobody can explain from many news sources back in, I believe it was 2018 or something. And the German news medias, I just remember now an article from Welt, but I believe there was also other articles, and they all said that the US had to give approval for the export of Taurus to South Korea because of the US components in it. And of course, the situation hasn't changed yet. The Taurus is still the same system. So it could be nobody is saying anything about it, no politician at all. It could be that the US needs to give approval and they don't give approval. And Scholz doesn't want to give the what is in English? The boo man? Is it also the boo man?
Blame.
The blame, yeah. Doesn't want to blame Biden publicly for not approving the export. I'm not saying it is the reason or this actually happens, but it could be because nobody can explain the articles from 2018 where everyone stated the US had to give approval first before a delivery to South Korea. That's the three explanations which would make sense in my eyes. Everything else is just an excuse.
If I may, I suspect that reporting from 2018 was just incorrect. The reason is South Korea did not want to buy Taurus. They bought Taurus because we refused to give them an export license to buy JASSM. That was their first choice. AGM 158 joint air-to-surface standoff munition produced by Lockheed Martin. That is what they wanted. That is what won their trials process for an air-launched cruise missile. The U.S., for reasons that I haven't been able to figure out, denied that request, and so they bought Taurus specifically because it did not require a U.S. export authorization.
That's interesting. Because when I talk to or try to talk that out with politicians, with the Ministry of Defense and stuff like this, I mean, I'm contacting people for my work, right? Nobody can explain it. Like nobody wants to even argue about it or talk about it. So it's very hard to. But when you say that they did it just because they don't need an US approval, I mean, I trust you. So yeah,
I've never seen any indication that that Taurus has any U.S. components.
Oh yeah, they have. That's known.
Well, I should say it depends on what the components are, I should say. The only thing I can think of that the US might be uncomfortable with would be is if it contains certain mil-spec US GPS receivers. But the whole thing is, we denied them for JASSM, and those GPS receivers have been an issue for other exports to South Korea. That's the reason why we denied them an export license for M57 ATACMS, was because we didn't want them to have those specific GPS receivers. So that doesn't really stick well for Taurus. I'm very skeptical that would be any sort of obstacle. The other thing to consider is that while it's very common for European weapon systems to have US components, very frequently there will be a export version that's and essentially always identical to the original, but the US components have been substituted. So that way US export authorization isn't required. For example, this has been done with, I believe, Eurofighter, the multi-information display system related to Link 16 and the versions that are used by the UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. That's a US component. I believe for all the versions of Eurofighter that have been exported, that was replaced by a European-built version. So it's entirely possible that any US components for Taurus would have been replaced by, European manufactured components for an export order, even though the missile performance-wise is otherwise identical.
Okay. So just for the components, just as an information, there's a Bundestag document which also lists the Taurus, and the document stated just receiving countries, and then they listed in relation to the Taurus Canada, Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, Spain, the USA, and the United Kingdom. But apart from Spain, nobody really received Taurus, and I doubt that the US actually wanted to acquire the Taurus in the first place.
No.
So my only guess would be that these are not the receiving countries, but that these are countries where components of the Taurus are inside. So if that's true, we have components from Canada, Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, Spain, the US, and the UK.
Maybe Austria is blocking the export then.
Maybe. I don't know. It's just confusing. Like I said, for my reasons I'm giving, nobody is want to give any answers. Everything else is just excuses.
So I'm gonna try and find a segue to the next topic. And by the way, welcome, Daniele. You prompted me to show this this graph. It says aid to Ukraine. Kyiv asks the allies to. Kyiv asks, "Does the will the allies respond?" Question mark. And it's from an Italian institution, I guess, and it basically lists the aid given per capita per year, so in euros. So basically, how much did each single citizen pay to aid to Ukraine? I don't see Norway here, which is, I guess, selective, because we would probably be around here somewhere. That's a little bit annoying. But what was your point about this, Daniele?
Yeah, first of all, good evening to everyone. And yeah, I think Norway is there, but this is just an extract of the entire table. They are regrouped like in order to do like a nice ladder, essentially. And this showed the stark differences between three of the biggest economy of South Europe: Spain, Italy, and France, which is also nuclear power. And essentially underline the big elephant in the room, because I'm a very, since day one, very big supporter of more help, especially from Germany, and we have spoke a lot with German aid to Ukraine on what could be done, what can be done better. But the problem, in my opinion, is that there are still European countries, as this study show, which is not a study. I mean, it's just pure number. These are real numbers that are given via the analysis of what has been spent by each country in the past year for helping Ukraine militarily. This is specific on military. And as you can see, an Italian has spent less than a euro per month. So this is really, really, really disappointing, because essentially this means that there is no willing from these three big economy to do anything to support not only Ukraine, which I mean is something that they should do, but also supporting the effort of their allies like UK, Germany, especially, which has been harshly criticized, honestly, and probably on some extent mainly because they are one of the biggest economy. They should be, they are seen as leader of continental Europe. But as we know, there are very little criticism even with France, because France can do much more, but they looks like that they are not going. They didn't invest that much. So I think much need to be done, especially in this, because this is completely outrageous, because spending that amount will not essentially deliver the help needed, because we cannot expect only half Europe or Northern Europe doing its part and the rest just taking the fruit when this will be over. So I'm very, very hungry by looking this graph, because it show something that is very, very bad.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
which honestly has more impact than the Taurus.
I mean, you can see basically both France, Italy, and Spain are, you have to basically times their spending per capita by 10 to arrive at the level of Germany.
Yeah, but I mean, even something in the range of US, UK, even Poland would be incredibly more, because it's a collective effort. It is something that we saw even when we do fundraise. You cannot expect one to cover everyone, but if more country can chip in a more reliable way, and these numbers are very, very much important, because they show also one of the key propaganda of pro-Russian in the respective country about, oh no, it's too much. They were giving too much. and this is not true. This is absolutely not true, especially in the case of Italy, France, and Spain, because the average citizen has essentially his life completely unimpacted by the support on Ukraine. But by counter, every day that we spend that there is a war, there is this war carry on, this will increase the cost of living, the cost of fuel. So it's incredible because this government are, for some reason, probably just to try to stay borderline, to say, oh, we helped, but not that much in case it goes bad. But essentially, they are damaging their citizens because by not committing more resources, they are not helping Ukraine and their allies, and so they are also essentially shooting on their foot, because the longer the war carry on, the longer their economy will suffer, and not only their, everyone. Yeah, you are showing, I see, another graph. I think I saw this one is about the aid in terms of in billion, I guess, and of course these numbers need to be also weighted, respect the GDP, because it's important to understand that smaller countries are doing much more, despite they have a small economy.
Yes, I just wanted to bring up like the gross statistics here, and I think it is important to note that these numbers are not necessarily completely accurate, but it's at least gives some indications, because not all countries do declare what they have been transferring to Ukraine. Like Finland, for instance, I actually suspect that there was more aid given than this. They don't talk about their aid that much, but yeah, there are some very large countries that are very far down on this list, and we all know, like Norway, Denmark, Sweden is not the largest countries, but we are, far above Italy and France, and that is kind of my segue, because John wanted to talk a little bit about some French bombs.
Yeah, carry on. Thank you.
I would add real quick too that usually it can be difficult to parse out like what is bilateral aid from the country and what is like aid from the EU, right? Like I don't know if that's accounted for here, for example.
This is just direct military aid.
Right. So I mean, these countries have given some aid that's not accounted for here directly through the EU, right?
Yeah, but the EU aid is not necessarily in military equipment transferred in the same sense.
True.
And also, if I can add just a little things, unfortunately, and I repeat, unfortunately, whatever comes from EU is always very slow, very slow. So normally the direct aid from each NATO country, or not NATO country, but from each country, is much faster. There is a deal, they approve the budget, and then they spend that, or they send a certain amount of equipment for the value of what they put aside for that financial year. Instead, the European Union is a big machine. It's much powerful than a country singularly taken, but is also very slow.
That's basically what Germany gets bashed for right now, right? To our call on spending more bilateral aid instead of doing more EU aid. It's funny that you mentioned it, actually.
No, I totally agree with your point, and I think EU can be very, very, very powerful, even militarily, but not now, because now there is not a collective defense policy. So how you can decide inside the European Parliament how you provide military aid when military is something more on a national level? It's like trying to solve a problem without having the infrastructure to use that approach. So I think going with bilateral, or I mean, for example, UK, Norway, and another bunch of North European countries are in a kind of consortium, or at least were in a kind of consortium when Ben Wallace was Minister of Defense, in order to buy ammunition and procure stuff. And that was very effective because they had a budget for that, agreed together, and then they spend that. So, and that was very fast, very fast.
So Tune backing in my segue apparently didn't work, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the stats here. And if you haven't tried to look it up already, there is a very good website made by the Kiel Institute where they track aid to Ukraine. And you were talking about the bilateral aid in terms of GDP, and they have this very nice tracker where you can basically see, including the share which is through EU, but then you will see Norway, which is not in the EU, is doesn't have that share because we're not in the EU. Same with the UK, which I don't see on this list, which is a bit strange. But anyways, this gives a quite good indication of how your country stands. And now I'm going to try the segue again, because France is and Italy as well is very far down. And if you take away the EU share, which you see is very, very large, both Italy and France are doing really, really poorly. And those are important countries in Europe with very large GDP and also quite substantial militaries. So, John, what has France been up to the last week?
Right. So France has made 3 rather significant pledges over the past week or so. The first was a pledge of an additional 40 Scalp EG, as I kind of mentioned earlier. That brings their total contribution to Ukraine thus far to 90. That's out of a stock of 135 unrefurbished Scalp EGs, or unlife extended ones that weren't inducted into the midlife update program. So that after this leaves them with 45 remaining Scalp EGs that could be theoretically provided to Ukraine. And then from there, they will just have the 250 midlife updated Scalp EGs they will keep for their own use, really, no matter what. In addition to that, they also announced in this part of the same press conference by Macron that they would be providing, quote, hundreds, or have begun providing, quote, hundreds of, quote, bombs to Ukraine. And French media, citing various French government sources, later confirmed that this was AASM, which stands for something in French that I don't remember. It's also known as Hammer, which I think is an export designation. It is a precision guidance kit for the Mark 80 family of general purpose bombs produced by the United States. It's kind of, you can really think of AASM as sort of a hybrid of the functionality of JDAM, JDAM-ER, and Paveway. So it consists of a nose group that contains the actual, as far as I'm aware, the guidance section. And there's a couple versions of this. There's a version that just has GPS INS. So like JDAM, there's a version with a semi-active laser seeker, so analogous to Paveway, in addition to retaining that GPS INS capability. And then finally, there is a autonomous infrared seeker version, again, retaining that GPS INS capability. And then there is the rear group that contains pop-out arrow surfaces. Those provide glide range. And so one of the aspects of it that's interesting is that I believe just unassisted, it can glide about 50 to 70 kilometers depending on release altitude. So it sort of combines all those functionalities that you would get from JDAM, JDAM-ER, and Paveway into a single, obviously, French domestically owned and manufactured kit. And French government sources, again, have been quoted by French media as saying that they would provide Ukraine with 50 of these kits plus associated bomb hardware a month for an indefinite period of months. So I'm guessing probably 6-7 months. I'll be direct. That throughput is quite pathetic. That's about 2 bombs per day. That's enormously marginal. I can't compare it to JDAM-ER deliveries and provisions because we don't know how many were contracted or provided or at what rate. All of that has occurred through USAI. The DoD has never commented on that, and because on the U.S. side of things was contracted via USAI and not in DoD service itself, it's not in the budget documents, so we don't really have any insight there. But that is a rather anemic rate. which is perhaps unsurprising given that per French budget documents, they only have 1,748 of these kits and associated bomb hardware. Well, setting aside the bomb hardware, they only have 1,748 of these kits in stock, which is rather terrible. Again, that's just a pathetic level of stock. France does have a unknown, unquantified inventory of various paveway versions, so that's not the entirety of French airdrop PGM inventory. But as sort of a general purpose weapon, that's rather terrifying to have such thin margins. They're rather expensive. I want to say the last unit cost I saw, and I haven't been able to find a more authoritative and recent French source on this. So the last figure that I had been able to come across was about 350,000 euros per kit, which is enormously expensive for this kind of capability. I would estimate that that's likely mostly a function of production volume. Safran's production capacity for these things is probably fairly small, so you get very high unit costs associated from each one, or with each one, both from the need to amortize, obviously, development costs, as well as you won't get any cost savings from ordering parts in bulk and raw materials in bulk, etc. Just as a point of comparison, currently a JDAM kit goes for about $50,000, or well, 40 to 50. It varies from about 30 to 50 depending on the procurement year, inflation and such, and the order volume. A laser seeker is only an additional 25K for laser JDAM or LJDAM. So these are low volume. These are expensive kits. I'm sure they'll get use out of them, of course, but it's nice, but it's sort of it's a drop in the ocean of material requirements. And then there's also a extended range version of this. So one of the genuinely interesting features about this kit is that there is a compartment in that rear module that you can fit a solid rocket motor in, and that provides a pretty substantial range increase. The figure I saw was 200 to 250 kilometers. That said, it's completely unclear if Ukraine would be receiving that. It isn't clear if the actual rocket-assisted version has entered French service. I believe it's been tested, but again, it wasn't referenced in French Armed Forces budget documents. Only the main versions of the kits with GPS, semi-active laser homing, and then infrared. Each of those three were individually referenced, but we don't really have any info as to whether or not the rocket-assisted version's available.
So, yeah, this is kind of a what word did you use to describe this the other day in chat? Boutique,
Artisanal.
artisanal munition. But I just want to say, like, credit to France for actually providing this. If it's so expensive and artisanal, I mean, that's if it helps Ukraine and it gives some additional capability, I'm super happy about them receiving them. Of course, several hundreds sounds like a big commitment. 50 a month is, I don't know how big of an impact it.
Well,
it's gonna have.
it sounds like a big commitment until you remember the Russians are employing 100 plus UMPKs per day.
Yeah, I think that by itself says how much of a commitment we need to. How much commitment we actually need to increase in order to help Ukraine to win this war. Do you think, by the way, that they're going to get the laser guided versions of this?
I'm not sure. I hope they get every version of it, of course. In terms of laser guidance, they may not be able to make use of the full envelope of capabilities there because they can't as easily designate targets via aircraft. They have UAV. I presume they have UAVs that can do it. They almost certainly do, but they wouldn't have the benefit of being able to loiter at medium to high altitude and designate it with the releasing aircraft. But they could still get use out of it from designation via UAV or via ground observer.
Yeah, from what I've seen about Ukrainian long range observation drones, it's come a long way, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have been working on giving some of those drones laser targeting possibilities. I mean that it would surprise me if they didn't, to be honest. And they fly pretty high, and it seems like the Russians are not expending air defense missiles to shoot them down, just like the Ukrainians also don't expend expensive and rare air defense missiles to shoot down the Russian surveillance drones. So they tend to fly for a pretty long time, and also quite deep.
I
in
would
Russian...
not necessarily assume that the Russians don't try to intercept the JDAM ERs, because they do definitely try to intercept Gimlers, and they've had a moderate level of success intercepting them with Buk, Tor, well, Buk and Tor mainly. The number I've heard was somewhere on the ballpark of about a fourth of Gimlers are intercepted. You have to remember Tor was specifically designed to defeat PGMs like Maverick. So if there's one available, it's not inconceivable that the Russians could try to engage it with Tor, JDAM-ER, Gimlers, etc. And again, we know they are engaging Gimlers and destroying a minority of them. The Ukrainians don't have that luxury, of course. They don't have the quantity of assets that are needed along the front line to be able to do that to begin with. And obviously, you have the limitations of interceptor stocks on top of that.
Yeah, well, I was more thinking about the actual surveillance drones, which are one of the biggest issues for Ukraine as well. That it's difficult to shoot down some of those Salas and Orlans because they fly so high. And I would assume that the Russians have the same issue, and they don't necessarily want to expend, or maybe have issues with shooting down the surveillance drones. Because I've seen the Ukrainians been able to operate them pretty far into occupied territory.
Yeah, the Russians will have a bit of an advantage there again because they have so many more systems like Tor, Osa, Buk, the Zalas and the Orlans. Those are mainly an issue for the Ukrainians because they orbit or that they loiter above manpads altitude and what's addressable by anti-aircraft gunfire for the most part. So the Russians will have likely have a bit of an easier time of it than the Ukrainians, but I suspect they'll still have challenges somewhere along the line.
Well, okay, so pretty substantial commitment by France. Hope that will increase, and we will see more coming from France. There was also some announcement about artillery last week.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to address that?
Oh Christ! This is the most. So this is the most French way to approach aid I've ever heard of. So what they announced is that France would be committing to the production of 78 Caesar wheeled self-propelled howitzers for Ukraine through 2024, through the end of the year. That 78 would be produced for Ukraine, and that France would contribute money to this, and they would open it up as a coalition for other partners to contribute funding. And so my initial read on it was, okay, the French are going to pay for all of them, with the caveat they are offering that they are giving other European allies and partners the ability to pay for some of them. So, if they want to. And then we get clarification from the French government that in fact, no, France will pay for 12, Ukraine is paying for 6 themselves. And if you want Ukraine to get more, everybody else in Europe will have to pay for the rest. And what's particularly strange is that the French offer seems to be that to Germany, to Spain, to the UK, to everybody else, is if you pay for the rest of these Caesars, we will buy stuff from you to provide to Ukraine, which is just itself. I don't know how to describe it. It's like they're trying to mutually subsidize each other's defense industries in a way that's entirely pointless because the end result is exactly the same as everybody paying for their own stuff themselves.
Yeah, we need to bring some positivity around the French aid so they get a little bit more motivated to pay up.
National workshops, John, will solve the French underemployment crisis.
Maybe they can actually work and have automated plants now instead of having people build this by hand.
I mean, if you look at the video that they released about the reopening of the Shell factory, is a bit disappointing. I don't know if Erlend has that, but looks like very much like.
It's somewhere.
And
I can try and find it.
yeah, I will try to find, and then we can show that. I mean, I have nothing against the French industry, but that one looks like very poorly assembled. Let's say that.
Well, John, you also wanted to talk about some missiles. I know it's not Friday, but
Yes, so Russian missiles. Some interesting news on this front. It's been known that the Russians have been working to improve the capabilities of their various long range strike assets, particularly the KH-101 air launched cruise missile, since the beginning of the invasion, and we've seen evidence or wreckage recovered for the better part of the past year now that pretty clearly shows this. The most notable was, I want to say, 6+ months ago, we had seen wreckage recovered that had what were initially thought to be infrared countermeasure dispensers, flare dispensers. These later actually turned out to be radio frequency countermeasures, chaff dispensers, to, in theory, defeat radar guided SAMs. That was a major design, and well, that was a notable design change they made in an attempt to enhance the survivability of the KH-101. It was also noted that there's a new version of the missile. There's a Russian word for it that I cannot pronounce for the life of me. So I'm just going to use the translation Product 504 AP, which is a version that's supposed to contain some sort of self-protection suite against radar-guided SAMs. It's unclear to me if that's referring to, if it's just a quirk of translation, and that's referring to like an EW suite, a defensive electronic warfare suite, or if it's referring to the radio frequency countermeasure dispensers. That isn't exactly clear, but it looks like pretty broadly across the board they're trying to incorporate improvements in the design to increase their ability to penetrate Ukrainian air defenses. And what's notable is that there was a comment from Vadim Sabitsky, spokesperson, who referenced a number of features that haven't been recovered, at least per publicly available imagery. Like concerning, for example, he referenced heat traps, which is a translation for infrared countermeasures, flares, as I said earlier, that hasn't been observed in publicly available video or images as of yet, or just the radio frequency ones. And it seemed like he made a more direct reference to defensive electronic warfare suites, etc. I think it's interesting that thus far we haven't seen any missile wreckage recovered with all of those features. So it seems like they may be cutting these specific features into specific missiles and deploying them, rather than having a unified, improved version that contains a coherent set of survivability upgrades. And also, just regarding that video of now playing Erlend, what we've actually, there was a longer and a cleaner version of that video that got published. That missile immediately, within a couple seconds, impacts the target after dispensing those flares, or excuse me, that chaff. So it seems like they've been programmed to dispense these countermeasures in terminal, or immediately prior to executing their terminal dive on their target.
so it's not like it detects radar or.
It doesn't look like it. I haven't seen any wreckage with missile approach warning systems or radar warning receivers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up before Daniele gets the word back?
I believe that's it for me today.
Yeah, thank you, John. So I have this video that you wanted, Daniele. Is it this one?
Yeah, I think it's that one. That one essentially show the thank you for removing the audio, because show essentially it's from France 24, I think, yes, and try to show the improvement in the production of shell in this particular case, but in general of all French industry. But one of the stark things that I saw in particular for the video that has been shown, especially when they interview people and they show the factory level, is empty. Is essentially empty. And if you go to Scranton videos, to videos from Washington plant, any plant that has been essentially shown is full of employees doing a lot of stuff. And I read a lot about the French weapon industry, in particular shell manufacturer. They have been very much on the edge of closing because there were essentially no order. In particular, I think this factory was nearly closed, and by my experience, I can tell you that there is this plant in particular that they are showing, despite looks very fancy and nice, is not working at 100% capacity, not even probably 50%, because many space on the work floor is empty. And normally, if you ramp up production, and I saw this happening, you start to put as much machine and people or robots in action. So you use every centimeter square of the factory. So I hope that this is just a start of the production, but looks like that their production of at least shell is quite slow, let's say. So it's encouraging that Macron even today stressed again that the industry have to move faster in terms of producing whatever equipment is needed, including shell. But this video that should supposedly show, the mighty France has started again to produce stuff, essentially to me looks like a factory that is working in peacetime, not wartime, not even dangerous time. And this comes from mainly the fact that by different reason I hang around in this type of factory, and this doesn't look very busy plant, unfortunately.
Yeah, we need to boost their morale, I guess, because
yeah. I mean, but by the way, these are all new machines, and they also produce the long barrel that you saw. They are producing in a new way, which I always told you. But the problem is that the production level are very, very low. If you compare to Ukraine, that is producing their own howitzer 155, like they reach in war condition like 6-8 per month, I think, which to me is incredible, being in the constant fear of being bombed. So everyone have to do better than this.
Yeah, I see that there's a lot of comments in the chat about these things. I'm gonna try and find the first question. Yeah,
There
here.
is Terry has made a good point also. I see one of the comment is
So this was the first question that I wanted to wait a little bit before we addressed it, and yeah, it's a question that is coming up now and then, and with good reason. So Mitch is asking in a short-term perspective for artillery munition. Recently, we've seen at least some positive news from Finland, Sweden, and then Norway funding the factories, essentially doubling the output is the aim, as far as I understood, on all these three plants, if not tripling in Finland. I don't think that's going to necessarily resolve the issue for Ukraine, but everything, every increase is welcome for Ukraine right now. How long do you think that's going to take them, by the way?
To what? Sorry.
To ramp up the production in both in all the three Nammo sites.
Well, if money is not a problem, it depends on what they want to do. Because if they want to build a new, essentially, just to cut it short, there are mainly three process that makes to make a shell. Now, the first is the producing a cup. Essentially, from a billet, you use a press, and then you produce a cup, then you extend this, is a drawing process, and then you have to squeeze this cylinder in order to form an ogive. And all these things can work in parallel, because you can produce a lot of parts, and then you may have, for example, different drawing machine or different swazing, different radial forging machine that produce the necking of the ogive. So it depends on what type of machine you want to buy and install. For example, there are other, and depends on how old is your factory. I think Nammo has a good and quite new plant, so probably they won't build new presses. So this will mean that they will probably buy new CNC machine, because there are some CNC to be done, a new numerical control measuring machine that allows you to do check on the shell in terms of tolerances in a completely totally automated way. This video is an example on how things has been done in the past. For example, this guy is extracting this shell manually. In Washington plant is done by a robot. Also, this action that he's doing, and the same in other plant. For example, in Scranton, there are robots that handle these things on a very long conveyor. That machine is doing the. For example, this is a check. This guy is looking probably for fracture and other things. A robot can do that. So if you invest in first of all hiring more employee that can use a CNC and CMC machines, and you buy this machine, you can have multiple lines doing this inspection, and so you cut a very big bottleneck. I remember Joseph and many others in the past asked me, "Oh, why we don't cut, quality check or quality on the shell?" The problem is that once you do this, you have a worse product, but you can completely increase your production if you do more check via automated control. So I think this can be done much faster, because a press can take up to a year, 9 months in the best case scenario, to install it and start to use it. Instead, a CNC machine, much less. You are speaking about months. If the machine is readily available, you buy and they come to install to you. So probably in the next 3-6 months, you will see a big difference from Nammo.
Okay. 3 to 6 months is, it's too late, because we should have done this,
Yes, it's
in
already
the
too late
beginning.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah.
This should have happened, probably before the summer of 2022. But it's finally there. The money is arriving, so we should be happy that the money is actually put on the table, at least now, because for a very long time it seemed that nothing was gonna actually happen.
Yeah, and also we have to take into account that this is an engineering problem. So doesn't mean that everything goes smooth. You may have issues along the way that you didn't expect, and so you have delays. So, and sometimes monies cannot solve the delay, because you need to solve the problem. You have to understand the problem. So this is essentially things that frustrate me, because since I start to talk about artillery shell, my first talk was about that. I immediately say we should start now to invest, and it's already too late. And the counteroffensive was still to start. And now is very late, but better than better later than never. So it's very good that this is happening, especially because Nammo is very capable industry, it's very serious, as Rheinmetall, as BAE. So I'm sure that they will deliver.
So Mitch followed up with another question: what is actually available to make shells now? And I don't know if it's super easy to answer that question, but I guess the best way to expedite production right now would be to hire more people, so that you can run factories 24/7 at least.
Yes, and most of the factory from Rheinmetall, BAE, and I'm sure 100% Nammo, they run 24/7, 6/7. Why 6/7? Not because they rest, but because these machines that produce and robots and whatever need maintenance. and you don't want in the middle of a production to have a failure of your components. So they normally run at least one entire day on maintenance. So the factory turn off, they do all the check, and then they restart. And of course, they work at the very least 3-4 turns. So this means that they need people. In fact, for example, BAE, the first thing that they've done with the money from the government, they hired 100 person just in the Washington plant, which is doing the large caliber, and other employee around. And then there is the other point, the filling, which is more difficult to understand because it's more it's not publicly disclosed, this type of information. For example, Scranton plant is still not super automated, but they have long they have a long assembly line where they have many workflow employee doing the same job. So essentially, you will see in some of the video from Scranton that they have a lot of personnel on the work floor. In here, the robot is taking the. I think this is. Let me see. Oh, this is the cup. You see, is a cup. Now he spray inside. Okay, and then he's going for another process which is known as the drawing. So now the die slide in and essentially create this cylinder that now on a conveyor will go and rest and go to room temperature very slowly. And these are dead time that you cannot avoid, unfortunately. You cannot just make the component like it is, like put in water and in order to go faster. You have to wait some time. You see, this guy now is expecting the inside. This is mostly done in Rheinmetall, and BAE is done by a robot, and so it's done much faster and essentially never stops. But of course, yep.
I thought it was the WD-40 was spraying in there, but it was,
no. Now all this pile will go to another machine, which normally is a radial forging machine that essentially makes the ogive. This is the first robot taking the billet from the gas furnace and taking then to the conveyor that will go to the first press phase, essentially. This is how the shell born, essentially. Yeah, you see, this is the billet that goes now in the first press, and then there is a second one. So you previously make a cup and then the longer cylinder, essentially. It's like an extrusion, the second step.
Daniela, this is maybe like a tricky question, but in terms of the numbers, just to maybe we can wrap our heads around this, and you're free not to answer. Like in per month, how many shells is Europe currently producing by our estimate? Like last year, I know they made this pledge and they reach a certain percentage of that target. So like if we base our reasoning on that, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, could we help people understand like how many shells they are producing versus the goal?
Well, I don't have that precise number, and if I have, I cannot probably say like loud. But what we can know is that they already passed the first pledge to the government in case of BAE, because you recently known that BAE produced 300,000 shell. I think some of them may be bought. I'm not sure about these, but it's a very big improvement, considering that before BAE was producing 105 and 155 combined for a total per year of 16K. Per month. So it's quite a nice results, and so that's the ballpark that I can give you. Also, because honestly, I don't have I could say a number that is wrong, but the 300,000 is a thing. So we know that they have been capable of delivering these. I'm quite sure that they produce most of them.
Gotcha. So BAE alone, you're saying 300,000 a month? No.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
If it was in a month,
yeah,
I'll say, okay, it's done. Okay, the war is over.
Okay, so in the order of tens of thousands of shells. Like one of these companies, we're looking at like in the order of tens of thousands of shells per month. Is that accurate? Right now, but we need to maybe double or triple that.
Yes, probably double is more feasible, because the point is that you want to speed up the production of the shell, which is the tedious part, because the filling in general is not that complex. I mean, it's a complex procedure. I discussed this some time ago on Twitter, but is easier to make it faster, because you can just create more filling line. That's it. But and also there are also issues with explosive, but in the extreme and case we don't have enough compound B or other RDX explosive, we can go on TNT, which is not optimal, but I mean, in the absence of anything else, is always an alternative. And by the way, I realize now that Scranton is not using a radial forging, but they are using a hold cold forming technique. You can see that when that one, you see? That one is essentially slowly reprofiling the things, I think. Or is doing a surface finishing. You know that I'm not sure. But this is it.
I think John wanted to add something here. Go ahead, John.
Oh, Danielle, if you had something else to say on this, please go ahead. I had something to add on a little related to this question, but a little bit aside from the production aspect of it.
Go.
What I was going to say is, in terms of I can't give a specific number because I don't know. In terms of what's available and untapped, there should be some capacity, some probably not particularly large, in Japan and South Korea. That it's unclear if we've been able to access either of those. That certainly doesn't look like it in the case of Japan. South Korea is a bit of a murky mess at this point. In principle, that could be something we look to draw to, but there's a lot of domestic political hurdles in both of those countries that would need to be overcome. We could also look to their existing stocks, but again, that runs into some pretty severe domestic political hurdles for much the same reason. And particularly in the case of South Korea, they have some very strong objections based upon desire to avoid eroding readiness for any potential North Korean hostile acts or incursions or otherwise hostile events.
Didn't quite make the cut on the news this week, but I would mention that it was a story that North Korean aid is now the top military aid to Russia. That they've exported at least 1 million shells, among other things. So I don't know. It seems like to me like it would be in South Korea's interest, but I sort of get their reasoning. I mean, what do you think, John?
I mean, I've had some conversations with some South Korean friends about this, and what they basically said is that their concerns or the political concerns on their end very much come down to the fact that they're extremely concerned about eroding their readiness for any kind of, again, North Korean hostility that's at the forefront of their minds. The other issue is that historically there hasn't been much political interest in Ukraine, or awareness or interest, and so there wasn't really a large base of domestic political support for the governing party to really fall back on if they were to take that step and potentially open themselves up to criticism from the various obviously opposition political parties that they are undermining South Korean security. They just don't have that large base of support to fall back on. What is interesting, though, and this is, again, just anecdotal from some South Korean friends. I haven't looked at South Korean polls or, if they exist on this topic, but they had said that the public sentiment there is rapidly souring on Russia, specifically because of the North Korean transfers. It's become a much larger fixture of public interest since those transfers began, and it's rapidly killing any remaining public sympathy in South Korea towards Russia.
Thanks, John. I guess maybe turn it back over to Erlend. Erlend?
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess that's the end of this topic for now. I've gotten a reader question, I'd rather say. or reader, a listener's question about a topic that was very heated back in, I guess, 2023, 2022 as well, about the A-10 bomber fighter. And it's coming back again because of some comments made by Oleshchuk, which is the commander of the Ukrainian Air Force. What do you think about these comments and the feasibility of the A-10 ever showing up in Ukraine?
Right. This is I would call personally an unfortunate deviation from the Ukrainian Air Force in terms of their public messaging campaign. Their previous stance had been that they will only ask for one airframe if allies and partners choose to provide or offer other airframes. They will, of course, take those offers very seriously and potentially accept them. But publicly, they're only going to request a single airframe, that is the F-16. This is a deviation from that, and I don't think it is to their credit. I'm not really sure why they're taking this stance. From the U.S. perspective, well, the fundamental reality is I'll speak to the A-10 first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Mirage. The A-10 does not have that much utility to Ukraine at all. It doesn't even have much utility to the United States Air Force. It is a fundamentally obsolete design. It was arguably obsolete when it entered service in the 1970s, but it just has almost no utility in the current environment in Ukraine, given how non-permissive it is. People have been pointing, saying, "Oh, the Ukrainian Su-25s are still flying. They're still lofting rockets." Yes, that's true. They've taken horrific losses, though, and the lofting rockets, it's not that helpful. They are not getting that much utility out of the Su-25s. I don't want to completely dismiss their impact, but again, the Su-25s are not, as I understand it, really a major factor in the battle space. They're just doing what they can with the airframes they have on hand. So it would be, from a U.S. security assistance standpoint, the question is, should we transfer this item that will have very little theoretical utility to them and will consume, it will consume the finite amount of presidential drawdown authority, a finite portion of that, as well as Ukraine's security assistance initiative for any refurb work that has to be done, repairs, sustainment support. That will cut into our limited resources that are available to continue to provide security assistance to Ukraine. And given the whole range of other needs that Ukraine has, it's inconceivable that A-10s should be provided to Ukraine. It's just absurd, to be blunt. Regarding the Mirages, I'm less familiar with the Mirage. I'm not really well versed in French aircraft, just in general. What I would say is that the argument that I've commonly seen presented publicly is as a supplement to the Su-24Ms, the fencers that have been responsible for employing Storm Shadow and Scout PG. The issue there is obviously France is drawing down their Storm Shadow, or excuse me, their Scout PG supplies. We have this 40, additional 40 that's being provided, and then there's a theoretical 35 that could come after that. After that, that's it for Scout PG from France. Mirage 2000D would also support Storm Shadow, of course. The UK will likely find itself in a similar position to France very soon, if they haven't already, where they will begin to need to draw down their deliveries of Storm Shadow to preserve their own stock for their own contingencies. So the supply of Storm Shadow and Scout PG is finite. It will be coming to a close likely in the coming months. Then at what point, once we get to that point, where does that leave the Mirages? And the answer is nowhere. They don't provide that much utility because, again, once you've run out of those two air-launched cruise missiles, that's most of the value gone. And at that point, they should have F-16s. The U.S. can provide JASSM if the political obstacles can be overcome. The United States can provide SLAM-ER from United States Navy inventory, as well as new builds from Boeing. Those can be integrated without too much difficulty, as I understand it. On the F-16, somebody could fund a crash integration program for NSM Naval Strike Missile from Kongsberg in Norway, onto the F-16s. Just once the Storm Shadow and Scalp EG supply begins to terminate and the F-16s are operationalized, that just leaves no place for the Mirages. I would say that the Mirage request is more sensible than the 810 request, in the sense that if the Su-24 fleet is in extremely bad condition, I find that conscionable, but it would not be an efficient way to approach how we continue to support and sustain the Ukrainian Air Force long term. This is not a good idea.
So maybe a better way to frame this is, what do the panel, or what do we think about Oleszczuk's signaling in that Telegram post? Because I think it's not completely by coincidence that he's posting something like this. It must be with a certain intention for something to happen. Could it mean that there's a dire situation on the airframes and the hours that they have left?
It's possible. I mean, the few Fencer images that we've gotten, the airframes look bad. They're not in good shape, and this is true for all of Ukraine's aircraft at this point. They've just been run ragged. They were all old to begin with, and they've been putting a lot of hours on them since the invasion began. Obviously, you have combat damage, both on sorties as well as Russian missile strikes. It's just it's not a fantastic situation. That said, this doesn't look like an interest that's been reciprocated by partners. The DoD has mentioned A-10s once, that would be a discussion that they could have on an ongoing basis for Ukraine, and then it never went anywhere. And again, for the pretty obvious reason of, we're never going to give them A-10s, and we shouldn't, because that would eat up a very large chunk of the finite resources that we have to provide security assistance. In the case of Mirage 2000D, there had been some discussion citing various French newspapers that this was under consideration, that pilots were being trained. Basically, all of those reports were either from non-credible sources, or they just didn't happen at all. A lot of false reports were cited. I want to say there's one mainstream major French media outlet that got cited a bunch, even though they never ran an article about it. And then there were others that got retracted or corrected. So it doesn't look like there's been any interest from the French government side of things.
Yeah, and I see, before we go to Marino's comment, Thierry put a comment basically, yeah, Mirage 2000 can fire Mika long-range AA missiles, not Meteor yet. And I guess the Meteor is more of a possibility with the Swedish.
Well, what I'd say briefly about Meteor is that it's irrelevant if they don't get the latest version of Gripen, because Gripen C can't make use of the full kinematic envelope of Meteor, because its radar isn't good enough. So if they get Gripen Cs, there's no reason for them to get Meteor. There's just none. They just use AMRAAM. It's cheaper. There's more of them. There's no benefit from Meteor, really, as I understand it. But I'm not super familiar with Micah. I'm not sure about the radars on the Mirage 2000Ds. I need to go check. So I'd refrain from making comment on there about the credibility of that capability.
And then there is a question from Marino. Why is Italy not supplying cheap M346 to support the F-16s in Ukraine?
That's an Italian aircraft I know next to nothing about, so I have no comment on that.
I can comment on that. That is essentially used by the Air Force to train pilot. It's a training pilot. It's an Air Macchi M347, 346, and is used essentially for training. It's a very, very good training aircraft. But the reason why Italy is not providing stuff like this is because never took part in any of the meeting, I think, at least in a proactive way, in terms of the coalition of F-16. So, or maybe I'm confusing that. But anyway, the problem is all the government. the Italian government never made a serious commitment in terms of support with the relatively new or particularly advanced weapon system. I think that the only things that Italy provided in large, not large quantity, but in a decent quantity is probably missiles for Aspide, something like that. Always stock stuff and anyway old. So ammunition at the very beginning and probably most of the stocks of M109L. But this was when Mario Draghi was the prime minister. So when Mario Draghi was in charge, I remember there was a quite momentum building up in terms of weapon delivery. Even a few PHZ 2000 were donated, if I'm not wrong. So I think the why is just because there is no political will to invest and to commit Italy to donate or support such type of machines.
Yeah, I can comment on the fact that Italy has. It seems like at least the parliament has approved a new aid package, but what is included in that aid package is not, known publicly yet. We're hoping for some good vehicles being delivered. There's quite a large stock of the Centauro, which I would categorize it as a cavalry with a 105 millimeter gun. It's similar to the AMX, but it's a lot faster, and the armor is a little bit better than the AMX 10. So hopefully that's going to be delivered, but I wouldn't bring my hopes up too much because the defense minister basically stated that Italy has done its part, right? So I wouldn't have very high hopes for a large package from Italy, even though I really do hope that the Centauro is going to be delivered.
Yeah, I mean, the Centauro would be the best that Italy could offer for land because we don't have a strong production of anything. I mean, Italy doesn't have a strong production of vehicle that can support by itself, and Ariete is not a very good tank. But Centauro it is. Centauro is a very good platform, and Italy is committed to buy the new version. So anyway, these vehicles have to go. So they would be very much appreciated because they are the much resilient version respect to the AMX10, the French version that was sent at the very beginning, which had some success, but I know by several reports that it is very lightly armored. Instead, the Centauro is much more resistant, at least for fragmentation from explosive and small caliber. So it's not a tank, but it's much more resistant than a BMP or other stuff like this, and has a very powerful gun. And also the targeting system is very good as well.
Well, it wouldn't be a discussion about Italian or French aid to Ukraine without a philosophical breakdown of like what a tank is, right?
Contrary to the legend, this one doesn't have 7 gears in reverse. It seems like it actually has 7 gears in forward propulsion, and I think the stated speed is 108 kilometers per hour, which would put it as one of the fastest armored vehicles there is. I normally kind of make fun of Italian tanks.
Well,
I mean, yeah, the Ariete. Yeah, go on, John.
I was gonna say putting a comically large gun on any kind of vehicle is stereotypically that's Italian procurement.
Is this Auto Malera? This gun?
The is at 105, so should be Italian production, but essentially I think is an L7. I'd have to double check. And regarding Marino is of course underlying a very important point. So, and I understand his comment. The M346 is not only a training platform. I knew that mainly as a training platform, but is also a light combat aircraft. So it can perform small kinetic action, of course. For example, carrying a weapon to do ground support instead using the A10, which I agree with John is not going to help much. Despite I really would like to hear the brrr and see the destruction that it brings, but it's just fantasy at the moment, and probably for the future.
Telling you guys, if I had just had one A10 during that convoy. No, I'm just kidding. Do we have any more questions, Erlend?
I see one comment that I think we could probably put as the last concluding comment on the fighters, and I think John would agree with me on this, that F-16 is the right jet. I would add that there is a real possibility that some sub aircraft would appear, but I think that relies a lot on Turkey, given the final.
And Hungary.
Yeah, and Hungary, given the final go ahead for Sweden to enter NATO, which is ridiculous at this point. But until that happens, the Gripens are probably going to be stranded in Sweden.
I would suspect so. I think people are
And,
going to have a real come to Jesus moment once the F-16s are operationalized and the Ukrainians figure out a bunch of tricks to make dispersed operations easier with them, is what I'd say about the Gripens.
Can't wait for the first Ukrainian that played War Thunder to remember the weak spots on a Russian air defense system or something.
Sorry, Erlend, if I can add just you asked me about the Centauro. Centauro has essentially is an L752, but is produced by Otto Melara as the entire vehicle. So yes, it's a fully Italian manufacturer.
Wow.
For example, this is another thing that Italy could help production of barrel. Just to mention one thing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna put one thing up here to conclude, because I mentioned the word cavalry, and CJ tweeted a very funny tweet earlier. It's all fun and games until the Jav Cav mounts up, and I think this is the photo of the week, guys.
It's beautiful. I'm saluting.
I mean, someone brought that horse somewhere near the front lines, I guess.
There's a video where there's an image with like two other horses.
Yeah, there it is.
Look at those
Honestly,
guys.
this is amazing.
I mean, one of them actually has the snow camo. The other one doesn't.
I love the faces of the horses.
They're like, not so sure about this. Well, I mean, I'm sure there are some cavalrysts that are very, very happy about this.
Just get
Yes.
Go ahead, Daniela.
No, it was a silly thing. No.
I was just gonna say, we'll give the audience a moment to appreciate this in all its glory. That's a Humvee behind it, right?
Yep.
Humvees, man.
Do you know how the keys of the Humvee look like, Joseph?
No.
Anyone?
Doesn't have key.
I think that's the right answer. Yes.
Amazing, just like a horse.
you
think
jump.
some versions of it, yeah, it does have a key. I think some of them do.
Well, if everyone has appreciated this lovely image enough, thank you so much to everyone for tuning in to our stream today to discuss the news this week about Ukraine. Thanks for liking and subscribing to Tochnyi and all that. We appreciate all your support. It really does help us spread the word to people. There's a lot of misinformation, fake news, well-meaning people who get stuff confused, things like that. We do our best to sort through all that. We work together to try to get accurate coverage of Ukraine. Tochnyi means accurate. So please subscribe, please like, please spread our stuff around. We really do appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Thank you to our panel for participating in a great series of discussions today on various matters. And thank you to everyone, of course, supporting Ukraine. We hope Ukraine gets all the material support it needs. It really seems to come down at this point to basic material requirements of industrial warfare, like artillery shells, stuff like that. So we're always in favor of reaching out to your local decision makers and informing them that the time to turn the tap on is now, both for our own security and the security of Ukrainians who are getting hit with missiles every night. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.
On behalf of the brave.